laughing at me, finding funny my tragedy.
Hello, I'm Ian Strathcarron, and I'd like to confess to being a publisher. Not a sin in itself, perhaps, but it does mean a multitude of sins are visited upon me. To make sure I don't miss anything, I'm going to be running through the subjects alphabetically, a kind of A to Z of shame, starting, funnily enough, with the letter A. A is for authors, or, as we say in the trade, and I speak as one myself. In fact, I only got into this game because my literary agent said I spent all my writing life cursing them, so why not try it? Then I could see if it really was an absolute racket, and if they really are an absolute shower, so I'm a kind of literary poacher turned gamekeeper. Publishing would be a wonderful business if it wasn't for authors. Slightly tongue-in-cheek, as without authors there'd be no books, but boy, do they know how to drive us mad. The word quixotic could have been invented to describe authors, so generally they have no idea of commerce in general, and marketing in particular, and live on their own kind of authorly planet. But what they do know is how to conjugate the verb ego in every tense imaginable, leading to what I can only describe as a delusional sense of self-importance. But I think there are 3 reasons to be sympathetic towards authors. Firstly, it's the loneliest occupation, locked up for hours on end with only their brains for company, under the no distractions rule. Secondly, it's the hardest occupation. That old cliché of blood coming out of the forehead isn't so far off the mark. And thirdly, it's the poorest occupation. Very few authors make a living from writing, although writing does provide them with a platform to make a living if they can bear to engage with the public. B. B is for book fairs. There are dozens of book fairs, but rarely only 2, Frankfurt in London. In fact, you could say only 1, Frankfurt, and these 2 define the book trade's autumn and spring selling seasons. Lock away several tens of thousands of media executives and creatives in lightless halls with no normal people as witnesses, and you are bound to hear an excess of bombast, baloney, and brouhaha. Frankfurt is by far the most important, held every mid-October and used to announce the following spring titles. Spring in book trade terms means any time in the first half of the year. It's gigantic, with 7,500 exhibitors from 100 countries taking up 7 halls, organised largely by languages. Then there is the London Book Fair, held every spring to announce the autumn titles. Compared to Frankfurt, it's a poor relation. There's no air in the halls, there are nothing like as many visitors, and exhibiting there is ridiculously expensive compared to all the other book fairs everywhere. Book fairs are not really about selling current books, but about selling future rights and translations. And of course, to meet the famous everybody, often people you haven't seen since the last book fair, with appointments on the stand every 30 minutes. And by the end of the week, no one has any idea whom they've just met and who said what to whom even half an hour ago. C stands for copyright, otherwise known as chaos, confusion, and chicanery, also known as the ultimate minefield, and one worth giving a damn good leaving alone. It is above all a legalized racket. The 70-year rule means works are copyrighted for 70 years after the author or artist's death. Now, it's understandable during a creator's or their partner's lifetime, but why great-grandchildren should benefit 7 years later, no one can justify. There is something supposed to be called the Universal Copyright Convention, but then special interests in the US, UK and EU have invented their own interpretations, onto which bandwagon have jumped all kinds of picture and literary agencies, often with the most spurious claims. So the two most misleading words in the English language are copyright reserved. What they really mean is, we don't know who owns the copyright, we know we don't, but you might just be silly enough to pay us for it. Fortunately, though, the whole corrupt edifice is collapsing, being undermined by the public domain crusade in the US, led by the Wiki movement, and the massive growth in fan fiction, which is unpoliceable and combined with the wikis means the whole racket is economically unenforceable. So one by one, leading museums are admitting defeat on the basis that if you can't beat the wikis, you might as well wikify yourself. D is for design, also drama and delight, the key ingredients that make up good design. I can't emphasize enough the importance of design, along with marketing, the two ingredients that make for successful publishing. Now, I mean no disrespect to chimpanzees, but any old chimp with an Apple Mac and some software and a fair amount of time on its hands can publish a book. What raises publishers above the primates is good design and later intelligent marketing, as we shall see. We are told not to judge a book by the cover. Well, critics may not, but book buyers certainly do, and for publishers, the covers are really important. They say modern book design started in the early 1950s with this jacket by the artist John Minton. And here are some other classic cover designs. It's fair to say that some books, like these two examples, sell only because of the covers, the content being somewhat piffly. And these are the shortlist from last year's British Book Design Awards. You can see far more graphic than before, so more drama than delight these days. But like hemlines and haircuts, they can only swing one way and the other, so be prepared for a return of the delightful. Books make the perfect gifts if properly packaged. So with certain books we say to ourselves that we're making gifts as much as publishing books. Our books are mostly about art, and therefore have to be objects of art in themselves, a double importance for the design. The book must be a total sensory experience, so everything about it is important. The paper, the end papers, the ribbons, the smell, the touch, the sight of it, all add up to a whole, total, sensual experience. So, E is for editing. Also, for expertise and efficiency. Perhaps in the subject matter, but also expertise in editing. And there's much more to editing than is generally realized. And efficiency because this is where the costs can spiral. If the editing takes longer and so costs more than estimated, you can guarantee there's trouble ahead. I'm going to include proofreading and indexing in editing. And if the text is already written, the editor reads it all at once and will be looking at tightening the text, looking for repetitions and checking facts so that names are spelt correctly, the dates are accurate, etc. If the text hasn't yet started, the author and editor will work together chapter by chapter. The better the author, the more they appreciate an editor. The idea being that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Proofreaders live in horror at the advent of the spell checker. And here's a poem to celebrate it all. It's called Ode to a Spell Checker. So, as you can see, spell checkers have increased the proofreading cost for publishers quite considerably. And if there was a way to reinvent them, I'm sure we'd all like to do so. That's the chaos caused by spell checkers. But even worse is its first cousin, the autocorrect function. Dictation software like Siri adds another level of gobbledygook. And lastly, indexing is an exercise in patience and exactitude. It's the final part of the process because of the page numbering, and it's still best by humans, although artificial intelligence is now starting to look for proper nouns, and it's all creeping in.